أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. First of all, having expressed my gratitude to Allah, the way He has taught us in the opening chapter of the Holy Quran, Surah Fatiha, which I have just recited, I would now turn to our distinguished guests who came here to share their precious time with us this afternoon. The way some of them who were given opportunity to speak for a few moments expressed their warm welcome, I can only say that I am deeply grateful to them, and through them I am deeply grateful to Canada, because this is my repeated experience that whenever I came here last, Canadian friends from all walks of life welcomed me not just as an expression of civility or kindness, but with a warmth which is seldom witnessed elsewhere in the world. It was sincerity which always overwhelmed me, and it is sincerity today which has once again overwhelmed me. This is the Canadian spirit of hospitality, of kindness, of humility, which I always pray to Allah that it should survive the trials of time which I feel are ahead. Various challenges are facing Canada. I try myself to be well informed on what is happening here, because although technically speaking, I do not belong here, but in spirit and soul and heart, I do belong here to this precious country. This is not only applicable to Canada. Being the head of the Ahmadiyya community, the worldwide Ahmadiyya community, which is now established in 125 countries of the world, I feel that way genuinely and sincerely. I feel belonging to the world community. Wherever Ahmadis are, I also belong, and that belonging has no affectation, no artificiality about it. But it's a belonging in my responsibility to contribute, not to seek benefits from that belonging. And today I'm going to speak briefly on that very subject. A few weeks ago, on the way to America, my plane touched Mexico, and I made a stopover for a night. There I had the good fortune of meeting many of the Mexican intelligentsia. One of them remarked that the President of Mexico some time ago made a very interesting remark about Mexico and its relationship to America. He said, "Oh, poor Mexico, so close to America, so far away from God." Now, when I heard this, it deeply saddened me, and the first country which came to my mind was Canada. I did not share this sentiment entirely with the President of Mexico. I didn't say, "Poor Canada, so close to America, so far away from God." All that I wished was that Canada may be close to God, but not far away from America. Why I thought of that, I'm going to share with you. This is a very interesting and tart remark, very intelligent observation. Yet, when I tried to contemplate on the message, I discovered that it did not have any depth in sincerity. It was a remark, all right, very interesting of course, but a remark which could not change a single soul in Mexico. A remark which was bereft of that profound sincerity and purposefulness which always moves the hearts to actions and actions to reformations. So it was just a remark, a very interesting remark, very wise remark indeed, but no more. What was lacking was the deep sense of sincerity and purposefulness. So when I further contemplated on this, I realized that to be close to any country is no danger whatsoever. To be away from God is certainly a danger. Whether you are close to America or farther away, I've seen countries who follow the vices which are spreading far and wide, mainly from America and other Western countries. If they are influenced by those vices, it does not make any difference whether in miles and kilometers they're close to the source of vice or not. Similarly, there are vices of a different type, but vices still, which are emanating from Eastern countries to the rest of the world. And it does not make any difference whatsoever if those countries who are recipient of those vices are closer or distant from the countries of their origin. I remember when I was a student in England, you could seldom come across a case of a corrupt policeman. But then came the experts on this subject from the subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and they taught them the art of receiving bribe. It happened before our eyes. We could not stop it. But the process started, and like the baldness, once it begins to take place, no oil, no potion can stop that process at all. Then the area of baldness begins to widen and more and widen still. And that is the case of vices everywhere in the world. So I thought, what should I say to Canada? My message, of course, was come close to God. But how? Everyone can deliver this simple message. But how can one close to God, and what is the meaning of being away from vices, not from countries? Having contemplated on this subject, I came to realize that vices have no existence in themselves. It's only the lack of nearness to God which creates shadows and dark patches in human soul. It's the emptiness which creates vices. And without filling that emptiness, no amount of advice to a people that you should reform yourself can ever achieve any results. Why should people be addicted to drugs, to alcoholism, to stealing, to enjoying life cheaply and as much as they can? Because they draw some sort of kick out of that. And if you tell them not to do it, that is not enough. Admonition just as a lip service does not mean anything and does not carry any weight. You must fill the blanks first with something superior, with something better. And only that can change the way of life of a people who are gradually being drawn into a world of vice. To Ahmadis here particularly, I point out that it is mainly your responsibility. You have come to a country with various motives and various motivations. Some of you genuinely found it difficult to live in a country where you are deprived of all your human fundamental rights. Some of you may have come and joined the procession of those immigrants to seek better employment and better opportunity to improve your economy and to improve your education. Why I say they may have? Because I'm a human being. I cannot judge what is in their heart. The intentions expressed are always the same, that they found life in Pakistan so miserable, so difficult, so unbearable, that they could not live there anymore. Yet, I cannot rule out the possibility of some who might have benefited from that. But all the same, whether you came with good intentions or with ulterior motives, you owe something to this country who has provided you with a haven of peace. A country which has not only provided you a home from home, but a country who has shown such respect to you, such appreciation of your good qualities, such warm welcome is provided to you by their leadership who do not owe you anything. That is the human quality which overwhelms one with its beauty and which makes it a greater responsibility of every Ahmadi to try to repay it with something better, if not equal. Equal, if not better, I should have said. But I emphasize better, and that is what I'm going to suggest. I said you should be godly. How can you be godly? I said you should run away from evil, not from countries. How can you do that? This is the question I'm going to address, piece by piece. I have gone through many experiences, and God has gifted me with the quality of remembering those experiences and remembering those stages through which I traveled from one place to another. I remember my faults, I remember my misgivings, I remember my falterings as well. And I'm going to share something with you, not with reference to myself, but with reference to my general experience in life. To be godly does not mean that you wear a robe or a turban like I am wearing today. Be specially dressed and distance yourself from the common public in a halo of holiness around you, which may artificially be created as well. That is not godliness at all. Godliness is something which appears in streets in everyday life, in homes, in your relationship to your wives, to your children, to your parents, to your friends. That commonality may be referred to by some as something ordinary, a human attitude. But sometimes this common behavior is a true indication of one's being godly. And I understand godliness in these simple terms. When you improve the quality of your relations with your fellow human beings, that can happen in two ways. One, that you have been brought up in a civilized country which emphasizes decency, and you have had a good schooling. Yet there is another way of improving your conduct, and that is with reference to God. And it is the second and the latter attitude in life which I am going to emphasize today. Civilization and courtesy are, of course, necessary for improving the quality of life everywhere in the world, but they are thin sheens. They are brilliant but superficial and skinny. At the serious trials, they always fail man. The moral conduct which is not rooted in the belief of God and in the closeness of God cannot survive trials. I take you back to the Second World War. Many of you must have remembered what was happening there, and then not only in Germany but elsewhere in Europe. I take you back also to the Far East, what was happening there in and around Japan. Just before the outbursts of hostilities, Germans as well as the Japanese were one of the most civilized people in the world. The culture of Japanese, their decency, their pride in being humble to others and being decent to the visitors had become a byword in the world. Yet at the outbreak of hostilities, the same Japanese and the same Germans appeared to the world in a completely different role, a role which will seldom be forgotten ever in the world, in the history of human atrocities against other human beings. What happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany, what happened to the Indonesians and other Eastern countries at the hand of Japanese, their sheer cruelty, the sheer beastliness in suppressing the very concept of disagreement was so thoroughly imbecile, so mad, that when you look back at that phase of history, it's unbelievable how the Japanese people could stoop so low as to be lower than beastliness itself. But then, when the period of war was over, the same people started returning back fast to civilization and to decency and to dignity. If that is godliness, then I have no brief for godliness at all. Because godliness is something which stays, which survives the trials of time. Godliness has a quality of permanence about it. So those good conducts, that morality, which hails from your closeness upon God and closeness to God, is the only thing which can survive. And it is that what I'm trying to preach to you today, if preaching is the right word. It is what comes to me with such force. It simply rises from within me, from my depths, that I cannot suppress this desire to share yearning within my heart. I want to tell the whole world that unless they draw the motive force for their morals from God, from being close to God, they cannot redeem the world from the precipice of destruction to which it is rapidly approaching. Why I say that, I don't want to enlarge on this, but I'll again attempt to tell you piece by piece how I suggest you should become godly. When you love God truly and genuinely, you want to know more of Him. And the more you know of Him, the more you love Him. And the more you love Him, the more you like to imitate Him in your character. God is forgiving. If you love God, you have to be forgiving. Not because you educate yourself to be forgiving, but forgiveness in itself is a thing of beauty. And when seen with reference to God, it requires a nobility which is not found in human experience. Forgiveness with grandeur, with magnanimity, with something so solid, so profound. That is the forgiveness of God. And without any ulterior motives, without anything to gain. That is the type of forgiveness which only comes to the godly people. But here in this society, there are few characteristics which we need for survival, and those are the characteristics which I want to emphasize in relationship to God and your nearness to God. We all say God is one. Few among us interpret it differently, but right in the profound recesses of our hearts, we do believe God is one, it has to be one. Because the entire study of nature gives us the same message. There is no duality in nature. There is just one single hand working in every natural phenomenon. So if God is one, we must all be one. We are His creatures. If we genuinely believe in the unity of God, it's impossible for you to follow a course of diversification which can lead you apart. Diversity and unity is a different question altogether. I'm not talking of that. I'm talking of societies falling apart in a parochial attitude, in a way that one country does not remain one country anymore. People belonging to one single country follow their own different destinations, and their interests clash with each other until a cry is heard from that country that we no longer can remain in this one single country as one people and one nation. So let's part our ways and let's find ourselves safer havens, those smaller havens. This is a process of deterioration which comes from the lack of understanding of oneness of God. Because oneness of God teaches you many things and cures you of many diseases. I have traced back my journey to the concept of oneness of God, and I assure you that during that long journey, which can never end, I found myself always closer to mankind as I closed upon God. I also used to have parochial concepts in my own little way. I used also to think of Muslim interests against the Hindu interests while I was a child. I also used to entertain Pakistani interest against Indian interest when I was a grown-up child, and then Asian interest versus the Western interest, African interest versus the non-African interest. All these concepts were not merely concepts, but I went through phases of sharing them to some degree. Yet, as God dawned upon me more and more, they became irrelevant and small and meaningless. Then I realized that man is one, as God is one, and we must all join forces with all sincerity at our disposal to do away with these forces of bifurcation and split. These are the greatest enemies of mankind. And when I say that, I draw this lesson not from any political wisdom, but from my knowledge of God, my experience of the unity of God. It's a deeply rooted urge in me to announce to the whole world that it is high time that we started thinking of unification rather than diversification. Yet I know, and you know very well too, that diversification of a sort can be accommodated in the singleness of unity. But of a sort, what sort? Exactly as you find diversification in the creation of God, in the entire universe. Everything He has created, there is diversification in that. Human colors are different, human nature and human expressions and human aspirations and human likings and dislikes are not only different looking at them from racial vantage point, geographical vantage point, but the diversification is so vast and so complete that each individual differs from the other. The children born of the same mother and same father differ with each other. Flowers of a garden, even if they belong to the same species, differ with each other. The fingerprints differ, and the genetic human prints differ. So there is such vast diversity, it's unbelievable. Yet, when you delve deeper, there is found that single thread of unity in that diversification, which does not pull them apart from each other, but make them a part of a whole, of a grand whole. And therein lies the beauty of diversification within unity. But when the diversification becomes distorted, then it is the unity which is hit by the diversification. It is that which is criminal to conceive, criminal to entertain, and most suicidal for a people who follow this course blindly without regard to what they are doing. Many things are happening in Europe. Many European countries which were considered to be one and single political entities are now falling apart. The same processes are being observed even in Canada, my beloved Canada, the Canada to which I came 2 years ago, and the Canada which left a lasting, indelible impression on my heart, so much so that I declared that if I were to declare any other country my home other than where I was born, it would be Canada. So how much I must have been pained to observe this phenomenon in Canada, that here the diversification is no longer a multiculturalism. It is something deeper, which is attempting to split the unity of the Canadian people. I was deeply pained and concerned when I noticed these traits, and also I discovered this time that perhaps Canadians have not yet acquired an entity, an identification. They're still in search of that identification. What would that be? If confusion is added upon confusion, if your attentions are drawn to such issues as when looked upon from a higher platform should appear small and trivial and meaningless, when they draw you to their lower status and lower level to a degree that you belong there, then something very deeply wrong is happening, which must be redressed. So my appeal to the Canadian people, and particularly the Ahmadi Canadians, is that they should start not only preaching unity, but also acting unity. They should all employ all that is in their power to keep Canada united in thought, in view, in direction, and in the will to live as one single, undivisible nation. Now, if it comes from God, if it springs from the concept of unity, then whatever other people do to you, you will not be diverted from your pursuit even by a single step. That is how prophethood is born. That is how the prophets deliver their messages. With total disregard to how people, the society around them receives their messages and treats them, both the prophet and their followers and their message. With total disregard to that, they continue the set course for improving the quality of life around them. That is the meaning of characters which are rooted in the belief and the sound belief in God. The second thing which I want to emphasize is your orientation towards what you can get from the society and what you must contribute towards the society. Of course, it's very understandable that it is two-way relationship. It's a give and take relationship. In the society where you are born and where you live, you have some responsibilities to discharge, and also the society has some responsibilities to discharge towards you. Yet in a strange way, when you become godly in the right sense, you begin to realize that emphasis is changing in your attitude. You become less demanding and more contributing. So much so that in the end of the journey, but I must say this is a relative term, there is no end of the journey towards God, but after a while, I should say, you begin to realize that you really want to contribute more than you want to demand from the society. That is godliness. Because God does not owe anything to any of His creation, but He contributes. He's all giving, not taking back anything. And that is a very grand attitude which is incomprehensible in any other term than the terms of godliness. So if you become contribution-oriented instead of demand-oriented, then you can really improve the quality of life wherever you live. On the contrary, when you travel away from God, in other words, you become more and more materialistic in your attitude. You become more demanding than contributing, with the result that there are so many unions and pressure groups created in the society which only speak of their right upon the others and never discuss their obligations for the sake of others. So this is how these two poles stand apart. Get closer to God and you will be contribution oriented. Go away from God and you will become demand oriented. This is why the behavior of the prophets is ununderstandable by the world whom they address, for whose reform they come. They can't understand what it means to give and not to take. Look at the time of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, when he came with a very strange teaching. A teaching delivered to a society which was already oppressed by the yoke of the despotic Roman Empire. A Roman Empire which was taking everything it could from the poor people of Judah. To them came a Redeemer of a different style of life, altogether, unbelievably different. What he told them was exactly what I'm telling you. Be contribution-oriented and not demand-oriented. If somebody strikes on one cheek of yours, offer the other. That is the contribution orientation. People with short-sightedness cannot understand these formulas. Unbelievable. What sort of education that be? That is why the Jews rejected him. And they rejected their own redemption. They rejected a new phase in their life, a new phase in their life whereby they would be delivered not only from the evil influences of Satan, but also ultimately to be delivered from the yoke of Roman Empire. But it required patience, it required understanding, it required belief in that message. Sometimes the messages do not produce result immediately, not in a few years, not even in the lifetime of a people, of a person, not even in the lifetime of a people within a century or so. It took 300 years of patient perseverance on the part of the followers of Jesus Christ to emerge ultimately victorious in every sphere of human interest. The Roman Empire lay at their feet. The crown of pleasure of Allah was on their head. They were the supreme at the end of those 3 centuries of their persecution and sacrifices they offered in the path of noble ideals. So, for Ahmadis, I do not promise quick rewards whatsoever. They may not seek any reward, they may not even hope for any rewards for their generation or for the generation to come. They may live in a society which may ultimately turn to them with hostility. What I'm telling you is surprising, but it may happen. So you be contribution-oriented only in reference to God. It is that which will make you independent of the responses you receive from the society. Talking of reward, the rewards come, of course, from God, but sometimes, as I have mentioned, they come very slowly, at a much slower pace than your greed would require. So that slowness of pace is not because God is tardy in his reactions. It's not because he cannot immediately reward the people who do good deeds for him, but because God wants to purify you, and he does not want your sacrifices attached to a desire for rewards. If that happens, then the goodness in man is completely destroyed. So the pace of reward is slower, because only then you can work unselfishly for the cause of God. Yet there is a sort of reward which is constantly coming your way, which you always feel if you have that quality of mind which appreciates such rewards. Goodness, the opportunity to do good, in itself is a reward. If you know what goodness is, then you'll understand what I'm telling you. To be able to serve the cause of suffering humanity, to be able to improve the quality of life around you, and to be able to do so despite the fact that the people to whom you want to do a good favor turn against you, they jeer you, they mock at you, they repay you in the bitterest terms possible. That is the reward, because you gain a sense of nobility within you, that sense of nobility which is unthought of by other human beings. You remain at their level, yet you rise beyond them. And that is the rising towards God. You feel God at your side. You look at Him for seeking His pleasure and knowing that He casts loving eyes upon you when you do such things, such good deeds for His sake, not for the sake of any rewards. That knowledge, that realization that you are pleasing someone whom you love, that is the reward in itself. But that requires love of God, and that requires that the goodness must be rooted in your love of God, not otherwise. Now, when I mention this, I say it from my personal experience, an experience which is not just monopolized by me, but is shared by hundreds of thousands of Ahmadis who are trained to work for the benefit of the society without ever dreaming of getting any reward for against that. What is sustaining them for the last 100 years? What is it that keeps them tirelessly pursuing the same course of sacrifice? It is only that which I am trying to express, that consciousness that they are doing it for the sake of God, who is all-seeing, who knows who is doing what for my sake. So the humanity for whom you are offering sacrifices practically disappears from the scene. As far as the reactions are concerned, that humanity disappears. Whatever you do, it may be totally lost to the awareness of the humanity for which you are doing, yet you will continue to do it. That richness of contribution only comes from your love of God and your awareness of God. The example in human experience of such a behavior is found in the attitude of a mother to a child who has just a vegetation life. I have seen some mothers tending such children years upon years upon years. There is one particular Ahmadi lady who is in my mind this afternoon, whose young daughter met with a very severe accident, and ever since she is just breathing. Nobody knows about his consciousness, how she feels, because she cannot express anything at all. She's just a vegetative life. And that mother is constantly serving her. Why? Because of love. The love does not require rewards. Sometimes even it does not require awareness. You are aware of your goodness. That is what is all important to you. That is the ultimate definition of goodness. It is related to your consciousness, and it is related to higher ideals. I want you to serve this country with that attitude. There will be many voices heard that there's some ethnic groups here and there who are getting more than they deserve. There will be voices heard that some ethnic groups are being deprived of their due rights. Don't join the chorus. Only censure yourself as to what is your contribution to the society. And your reward must be the goodness itself, the opportunity to be able to serve in the cause of Allah and in the cause of His creatures. Another very important thing I want to advise you on which I want to advise you is the cheap and vain pursuit of pleasure. It is something which is destroying civilizations all over the world. Man is becoming more and more materialistic in the sense that he wants immediate pleasure with the minimum effort to be spent in achieving that pleasure. The result is the shortcut or short-circuiting to pleasure. That is the growing orientation of the modern man today. It is everywhere the same. It's not only in America or Canada or England or Germany, it is in Africa, in Pakistan, India. Wherever you go, this is the modern trend of man. And this is a suicidal attitude which is rapidly eroding peace. If you talk of peace, if you want to establish peace in the whole world, in human relationship, how can you dream of achieving peace when your hearts are not at peace with yourself or with your family members or with your neighbors or with the society in which you live? You want kick out of life. You want exhilaration. And sometimes there are values which are swappable, which are exchangeable. And people do not know what they are bargaining for. In the generations of today, there is more trend towards achieving excitement and exhilaration and kick out of life rather than the pursuit of peace and contentment of heart. So the values have been swapped with each other slowly but progressively. There was a time in the earlier generation when people wanted peace and contentment. Home and hearth had become a phrase delivering the message of a haven of safety from the hazards of the society outside. Homes were much more peaceful than the society around. And because you loved peace, you wanted to share your time as much as possible with the people at home, with your mothers, with your children, with your sisters, with your wives, and so on and so forth, where family was the unit which guaranteed your peace of mind and peace of heart. No more so. People, and a large majority of people, only return home when they are tired, remaining outside, when they cannot get any more kick out of society around. Then they return to their bed to sleep like a log and then to leave the home again without any regard for their relationship with their family members. I do not say this is a phenomenon which influences every society today. There are some societies, like for instance the Italians, which love families, and they are much less influenced by this trend in modern man than many other societies of today. But they are also being eroded gradually and slowly. You cannot live in islands, in oceans, without being influenced by the corrosive influence of brackish water. So it is time for us to be aware of these dangers, and it is time for us to reverse the process. As Ahmadis in Canada, I remind you that you should present such attractive family units to the society, such models of beauty and peace, that the society should learn from your models, from your realistic way of life, not from your sermons. That is the only way to make people interested in what you want them to be interested in. Present yourself with such beautiful models created in your own homes, that people who really are striving for peace, although they are not pursuing it, would ultimately turn to you for safety, for guidance, and for ultimately delivering them from the hazards of the life around. These hazards, which I mention as just hazards, are so many: drug addiction, alcoholism, mugging, smuggling, food addiction. That I also call a hazard. And the so-called fast life, in which you want to move rapidly in an atmosphere where you want to share everything of the player in the shortest possible time, at the shortest possible expense of your own labor. The result is that at the end of the day, people who pursue madly this vain player are left with nothingness, just emptiness. If you probe their hearts, and sometimes I have attempted to probe the hearts of such people, I have always found that at the end of the day, they have gained nothing. It's only an emptiness, an awareness that something else was needed which escaped them. And the next day they would pursue the same vain, the same pleasures with vanity, which had eluded them the earlier day and the day before, and so on and so forth. So godliness is what comes to help you. And I know the time is getting short. I don't want to take too much of your time, but this is a very important aspect which I must share with you. How can godliness fill the vacuum in man? How can godliness give you that peace of mind and heart which is lacking and fast disappearing from our lives? The message I want to give you is this, that man lives for something. He can never live in vacuum. He can never live in void. So you must change emphasis and change values, otherwise you cannot improve a society which is used to a lower order of values. Only a higher order of values can replace the lower order of values. If you do not have that commodity with you, you simply cannot improve and reform that society. You must be contented yourself with an experience of values which you know is certainly better and lasting than just the pursuit of vain pleasures. People who are godly people do not live in vacuums and emptiness, that I assure you. They are most certainly the happiest of all the people in the world. They are the most contented people. They know the life around them, yet they are not interested in that type of life. To make you share my views, which have become rather more delicate and inexpressible, I find difficult to put myself across in this particular sphere of discussion, but I will try to make it easy by telling you of an experience, my early experience as a child. Once I was driving by a butcher house, where carcasses in Pakistan, the butcher houses are not as well kept as here and not as hygienic as you are used to in your country. But there, the carcasses and the waste material is thrown out on, on the doorsteps or along the curves of the road. So once I witnessed a strange, strange happening, something which alerted me, and I said, look, what is happening? It was, the place was stinking with stench and unbearable, obnoxious odors. The carcasses were smelling so bad that I wanted the driver to take me faster from that place, but what was happening there, that arrested my journey, and I told the driver to stop so that I could watch and pause and think and see what is happening. There were dogs of all sorts. They were fattened with the waste of that butcher house. And they were at those corpses, the waste material of the butcher house, enjoying with such luxury, devouring of that dead matter, that it amazed me. I felt like vomiting. It nauseated me. Yet from the dog's point of view, that was heaven for them. They were enjoying that immensely, and you could see it in their attitude, the way they were at it, and the way they looked so complacent, so happy, so satisfied. Absolutely nothing else could provide them with the concept of heaven as they were experiencing at that moment. Then I realized I might have been just one of them in relation to God, in relation to godliness. If I cherish sin, if I love sin, if I pursued pleasures which are vain, which are ultimately detrimental to the peace of mankind, after all, I'm like a dog. The tastes are different. The dog has a relish for those dead corpses. And germs and pollutes the air. Becomes diseased, unhappy with the passage of time. It becomes captive in the hands of its own desires. So I pondered and wondered what we would appear to God when He looks down upon us, deeply engrossed and engaged in our pursuit of vain pleasures. Then I realized why prophets look so different, why they walk the streets of a society which apparently is so advanced and has learned many arts of pursuing pleasure. There appears a prophet of God who is completely disinterested in that. He looks down upon them not with venom, not with pride, but with a deep sense of sorrow, with a deep sense of loss. Then I knew the meaning of different values and different attitudes. I said, prophets are not denying themselves something. They don't want those things. Then I realized the meaning of selflessness of prophets. Then I understood that what they avoid, they don't like. It's not a difficult life for them to avoid sin or to shun the ugliness of material pursuits. Their tastes are elevated. They live among the people, but in a higher order of attitudes. They are no longer the same dogs. They have become human beings in relation to those dogs. And when they look at the dogs devouring the dead, stinking matter, they pity them. They don't laugh at them. But something else happens. Then the dogs turn to them and start laughing at them, mocking at them, telling them what they do not enjoy, what they do not know, what they are missing. So life is a strange life of relativity. No more, no less. What is the ultimate truth? The ultimate truth is elevation of your values, your tastes, your attitudes. Then you will not live in void, but you will live in a higher circle, in a higher atmosphere, where you will enjoy things far more than those who live in a lower order. So this is what I'm telling you. The finding of my lifetime. I'm not speaking like a philosopher. I'm telling you how every human being should understand life around him. So without changing the standards, without elevating the demands in human life, you simply cannot improve the quality of people around you. You cannot simply fight the sin. Fighting of the sin is not a fight with swords or with venom or with losing your tempers. That is not the fight I have in mind. That is suicidal. What I mean, a fight which begins within you against your own evil dispensations, against your own evil attitudes, elevating yourself so that what was previously something coveted by you becomes a thing of sympathy and pity. That is the raising of levels which I'm talking about. And looking from this angle, I know there is a lot to be done by the Ahmadis living in Canada. When they look at some happy couples appearing on television, enjoying life with wines and dancing and flittering away, if they feel a sense of deprivation, if they think that they're missing something, then of course they're missing something. But what they're missing is godliness, the correct attitude. They should look at them with pity. They should know that what pleasure they are deriving is not a permanent pleasure. It is just an exhilaration, no more. They will return to their homes empty of their hearts, empty of peace. So the quality of life can only be improved if you have become truly godly. And that is what Canada needs. The godliness, one last thing I must say, gives you something which is most essential for improving the relationship between man and nations and nations. Godliness provides you with an attitude which is free from all complexes. I can speak on this subject for much longer, but I do not want to unnecessarily trespass upon your time. So I would like to be very brief on this subject. According to my study of human history, inferiority complexes have played a vital role in destroying the peace of man. Only in recent history, you have seen how America unfolded itself from a summit of power towards the Gulf crisis. People would say it has nothing to do with inferiority complex. But when I share my views a little more with you, then you'll understand what I mean. What was urging them on to a glorious victory against, in fact, a defenseless small enemy was the inferiority complex of Vietnam.
that was hanging heavy on their souls and consciences. They knew they were defeated by a small country, and they wanted their revenge. They wanted to reassure themselves that they are great. So if one weak country defeated them, why not defeat another weak country, which is less equipped to withstand these pressures, one-sided pressures? And they were wrong. And you remember, once President Bush also said this, that I assure you it will not be another Vietnam. What had Vietnam to do with the situation in the Gulf? That means on the American conscience, it was weighing heavy, the very thought, the dream, the horror of Vietnam. So one complex becomes a national complex, and it remains live underneath the surfaces, sometimes for generations. And when you study the human history from this angle, you will be able to resolve many things which otherwise you will fail to understand. An atrocious war is fought because of complexes. And in human behavior too, the same is true. Those who suffer from complexes, they always remain distorted. And a straight, healthy personality among them never develops. When I visit other countries, I meet so many Ahmadis, and some of them I pity because I notice a lingering complex in those. I'm not naming anyone, of course. I'm not deriding anyone, but I'm going to share this experience with you so that those who suffer from this may be able to realize what they are suffering from. There are some poor families in Pakistan and India in which the young boys and girls grew up with the consciousness that the society had not paid them their dues. They grew up with a sense of vengeance. They started deriding the others. They started hating the rich. And that became in them a sort of inferiority complex. With the result that when they went out to other countries and improved their lot and became rich and wealthy, then they always showed themselves off in a manner as to remind others that, look here, we were those to whom you did not come with mercy and kindness. Now, if you turn to us for help or anything, nothing would come your way. We are independent. We have nothing to do with you. That society is a matter of the past, buried in the past. We no longer belong to Ahmadiyyat. We no longer belong to that concept which you are serving, because we have grown out of it. We have become independent. Apparently, this is an expression of superiority. But there is no complex known as superiority complex. It's always the inferiority complex. It is the shadow of the suffering of the past which takes the disguise of a superiority complex. This is the most destructive force in man. When I visited Africa, I was deeply impressed that the Africans, despite being some of the poorest nations in the world, did not suffer from an inferiority complex. It's the great boon of Allah and a great mercy of God upon them that in poverty they live like rich people, honest, straightforward, or even in corruption. They suffer from no complexes. Africans in America suffer from complexes. As such, they are destroying their own future. So my message to them has always been, whenever I went to meet their leadership, that first get rid of these complexes. Without that, you can never aspire to become what you should be. You can never aspire to get your place, honorable place in society. So here too, in Canada, inferiority complexes can create disorders. They could be hidden from view, but still they would be complexes. I don't say that those separatists who belong to France originally, who speak the French language, they are suffering from an inferiority complex. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that whenever man's behavior becomes crooked and not healthy, there has to be some underlying force working within that man which is not correct, which is not healthy. And most often than not, there are some personal or national complexes which are working within us as individuals or as groups. But to be godly rids one of all complexes. It creates an attitude of humility in man which is so beautiful, which is so overwhelming, which improves the quality of life in man. That is why the prophets of Allah, who are addressed by God as the best of mankind, are the humblest of his servants. Because knowing God, getting closer to God, makes you realize that you are nothing. Only then the true humility can be born in you. And that nothingness in relation to God does not create a complex, but creates a realization of humility, which is your protector, which becomes your guide, which becomes your motive force. And that humility is what every Ahmadi must acquire. And with that humility, every Ahmadi must serve the country where he lives. When I say must, I do not mean this humility can be acquired artificially. It's impossible. Humility and artificiality, humility and superficiality do not go hand in hand. Such expressions of humility which you witness sometimes in great people are just hollow, vain expressions. They don't mean anything. They are again a complex, an expression of complex. They think that through the expression of humility they would appear great. And it is the urge to always appear great that makes them behave as a humble man. But the humility which I'm talking about is rooted in your love of God, in your nearness of God, when in a moment of wisdom, you suddenly realize that you're nothing. You are really nothing. All that has been given to you is given by God. All that you retain is because God wants you to retain it. As long as He does, you will retain it. When He deprives you of it, you are nothing. So with that attitude, when you look at a humble person who has lost one eye or one limb or is hit by some disease like typhoid or other diseases which leave people disabled for life or which affect their mental processes, then you will never look down mockingly at such a person. Then you will realize that this is what I am. If God had withdrawn His favor from me, even for a moment, I may have ended up worse than this person. So you pity him and you want to share his misery. You never mock at him, you never laugh at him. And this attitude as a collective attitude becomes your national attitude towards other nations. That is what I want Canada to be. Not a nation to look at other poorer nations with pride, with an attitude of commerce, with an attitude of what you can draw from that country in return for what you do to that country. That attitude is already existent and operative in the human relationship everywhere in the world. All nations have the same attitude towards other nations. But I'm talking of a different thing. I'm talking of a nation whose collective awareness has made them realize that God has blessed them with certain things which they did not bring with themselves as they were born, in the making of which they had no part to play. If 70% of sweet water fills the lakes of Canada, it's not your doing. God has so blessed you. If you have vast resources at your disposal, it's not your doing. God has blessed you with them. So look at all the wealth or the potential wealth with which God has blessed you. And if you are a godly person, if you love God and realize what He is, then gradually, instead of being so wealthy and so favorably disposed, you will not feel a sense of grandeur and greatness. You will feel a sense of humility. I do not deserve all that, yet I belong to these things and these things belong to me because God has so chosen. Why should I not try to improve the quality of less fortunate people, the sections of humanity, who are also servants of Allah, who are also creatures of Allah? This humility completely transforms your attitude to other human beings and other nations as well. Once I remember discussing this topic of helping Africa, I broached this subject with a member of parliament from Canada. He's a very kind man, I know, very warm man, very loving. Yet he said, we are politicians. What would you offer us in return? What is the package deal? Why should we do this for Gambia, for the Gambia, for Nigeria, for Ghana? What shall we get in return? If the Americans do that, they get in return political ascendancy, and their global interests are served. So prove to us what we will get in return, and then of course we'll contemplate favorably on these suggestions. I did wish that the attitude in political thinking of Canadians were different. I did wish that their closeness to us, their kindness to us, could benefit them in a different way altogether. What can they draw from us? We are a very poor community. We're a helpless, small, insignificant community. The only benefit they can draw from us is to share some of our qualities, some of our noble pursuits in life. And if they do share this with us, I assure you, they will share the concern for the entire world with us. Then they cannot sleep in peace if other sections of human society, less fortunate sections of human society, are suffering. That is the meaning of godliness. Your peace is no longer enough for you. The peace around you must also be shared by you. If there is no peace around you, then you share the suffering and restlessness of the world around you. This is the meaning of godliness. And if you acquire this attitude, then you will be able to ultimately to create a better world out of the world which we have inherited today. I realize we are very small in number, we are very small and insignificant in our power, political as well as economic. We're just a drop in the ocean. But the route, the path we have chosen to follow is not a short path. It's a long path into history, into future. And the path which I'm asking you to pursue and tread is the limitless path, which always ends up in victories. At best, we are a drop of curd in an ocean of milk. I agree. It may take 1 century or 2 centuries or 3 centuries for the ocean of milk to turn into curd ultimately. But if you have that quality of curd that you call yogurt, then I assure you that you are bound to emerge successful in the end. Only keep the quality alive. Only let not the quality be influenced by the surrounding toxic influences. If you preserve your quality of godliness, then I assure you, godliness will always emerge victorious. It may take time, but God has all the time to himself. And that is what also is imparted to you if you are truly a godly person. You have no patience whatsoever, no impatience whatsoever, no hurry. You live with God. You die with God and live again with him. And the time scale by which human beings measure time becomes a small thing in itself. Eternity takes over, and the goodness in itself becomes the ultimate object of your life, and whenever you achieve that object, you become successful. So my message to you in the end would be, continue to pursue this path. If you die in that journey, at whichever step you die, you will die victorious, because you will be traveling along with God. And you may die, you may leave this earth, but only to relive with God eternally and forever. And again I assure you that each step you tread on this path will be a reward in itself. Only you have to change and improve your attitude to life. Be contributive. Forget about your demands on society. Try to discharge your responsibilities towards the society, not with an end to please this society, but to please God. I hope, and I know I am right, if Ahmadis continue to do this today and tomorrow, a day will dawn ultimately, which will be the day of peace for the entire world. You are small and insignificant today, but you will not always remain to be small and insignificant. Why don't you draw your reassurance from your past 100 years? What were you and where were you? 100 and some years ago, you were just one person living in Qadian. You were just one single person who lived in Qadian, who was so obscure that even the society around him did not know he lived. And yet God spoke to him and told him that I have appointed you to deliver a message and to change the style, the life of the world, to revolutionize the whole society. When he received this message, immediately the reaction of the people around was that he had gone mad. One single person was entirely rejected by his own family, by the society around, of the Muslims, of Hindus, of Christians, of Sikhs. Everyone rejected his message. Yet God told him to continue to tread the path perseverantly, without looking right and left, knowing full well that God was with him, and those with whom there is God, they can never fail in delivering their messages. They always ultimately emerge victorious. So God told him that I am with you. You have been rejected by the world, but I have not rejected you. So go on the same path of goodness, spreading healthiness in the human life all around you. And I assure you that I'll carry your message to the corners of the earth. That one voice has become 10 million voices today. That one town has become hundreds of thousands of towns in the world. That one country has become 125 countries of the world today. Look back at your past. Seek reassurance from how God has been treating you. And go ahead with full confidence into the future. You are the people who are going to transform the future of the whole world. And I want you to share it with Canada. You go to the world along with the Canadians, supporting each other in the pursuit of godliness. God be with you, and let's spread this attitude throughout the world and transform the quality of life. And as we become godly, we turn people into godly people. That is the only peace which can be known to man. No other peace is worth the song. Allah bless you.